Okay, so we've talked about, we've kind of reviewed object orientation and looked at more complex examples using multiple classes and how we can organize those and connect them together. Now we're going to move on to talking about CSVs. So CSVs it's basically just a text file, except that there's a standard separator. And typically that's a comma, but it could be something else. It could be a tab, it could be another value. So what that looks like is this, right? We have a bunch of entries, and then we have commas, and so on. So that it seems kind of meaningless. Maybe if you just look at it, it looks like a bunch of kind of gibberish, but there's actually a structure, or at least a structure can be imposed on it. And that structure is going to be analogous to a database table. So we'll start looking at databases next week, but this is an introduction to a way to persist data in a Python application without using a database for now. So typically when we've been making things so far, we have a function, and maybe we start off by giving our function some values, or maybe we get some user input and we store that. But once we're done running the application, that's it. So any values that we've created or calculated or stored in variables, it all disappears once the program's execution completes. In real-world applications, you're frequently going to want to persist data in one, of one type or another. So, for example, if you have a web application and you want to save user accounts, so a user can sign up for an account, and when they do that, that information gets stored in a database, so it persists, and the user can go away and never use that application for a long time. A year later, can come back and log in, and that information has remained in the database, so the user will then be able to log in. So that's the basic idea. We frequently want to keep data around, from one run of an application to the next. CSV is another way of doing that, and a CSV is very similar to a spreadsheet. So we have a spreadsheet here, and again, this looks like this could be a table from a database where we have columns with names, and then we have rows that are kind of almost instances of the given values. So here we have a bunch of orders, and you have the date, the region, the representative, the item, units, and so on. So it's very easy to convert something from a spreadsheet to a CSV and vice versa. And if you've ever worked on other business applications, or there's actually a whole wide range of uses for CSVs and spreadsheets, which I'm sure you're aware of. So what we can do here is, this is just a random sample spreadsheet. We can, for example, save this or download it as a comma separated value. And if we do that, you can take a look at it, and that's it. So we've turned our spreadsheet with all the nice colors and orderly appearance into just text, and then text with commas. So it's not terribly exciting, but there's a lot of things that this will enable us to do. But before we talk about CSVs in particular, we're going to take a step back and talk about files in Python. So, manipulating CSVs is fine, but manipulating files is a more general issue that we can talk about real quick. So I have a sample file right here, sample.txt. And this sample.txt, if we want to do something with this in Python, it's fairly easy. So Python is a a very simple API for using files. So we can do something like my file object equals open. So we use this built-in command open, and then we give it a path to the file. So files/sample.txt, and we can go ahead and print it. So you might be expecting to see the contents of the file. We'll see what happens. Okay, so we get this very strange object thing. It's IO. It's a text IO wrapper. Okay, so that's not very helpful to us right now, and that's fine. But like Python's other built-in things, so we looked at the regular expression using the regular expression module or library in Python, and what happens when you use that is that you will search for regular expression in a string, and you don't just get back maybe directly whatever you think you're looking for. You get back an object, and then once you have that object, then you can do stuff with the object. So there's a similar principle here where I run a method. I want to do something with a file, but I can't do it directly. I get this initial object first, and once I have the object, then I can start doing stuff with it. So printing the file isn't all that useful. We can use some introspection tools to just get an initial look at what might be available to us on a Python file object. So instead of printing the file, we'll use dir my file object, and we'll see what we get. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Most of this is just built in, like class, delete, dict, less than, iter. So all this stuff we don't need to worry about. But once we start getting towards the end of the list, we can see things that are specific to the Python file object. So we can write lines, we can write, we can truncate, we can seek, we can read lines. So it looks like there's a whole bunch of methods and properties that are going to be available to us. So we've created this object by running this built-in open on the file. We get a file object, and then we can do all kinds of stuff. So let's try out one of these methods. So we'll print my file object dot read lines. Let's just see. And we'll see what we get here. We'll comment out this first one. So we're going to run read lines. And what we get is an array. We get an array, and at every new line, we get a new element. So if we look at our file, okay, I'm going to travel from an antique land, and then new line, and then new line. So it's basically taking the input and then splitting it based on a new line. Okay, so that can definitely be helpful. We can read, we can write, but let's go ahead and take a look, and let's just say we want to, we want to read it again. So we just read it, but it's such a good poem. Let's go ahead and read it again. Okay, so that's strange. So the first time we read the lines, we get an array with all of the contents, and the second time we get an empty array. So if we look here at the dir, all of the methods and properties that are available to this object, you can see there's something called seek. So when we have a file, we create this file object, and when we read it, we go to the end of the file, and then that's it. We're at the end of the file. It's kind of like once you loop through everything in the array, you're at the end. Unless you run the for loop again, then you're just at the end. So we can try playing around with this. Let's go ahead and we'll run one of these. So we'll read all the lines in the file, and then we'll try running seek. So maybe we don't know anything about what the seek does. We can look at the documentation, but we can just play with it and see if anything works. So my file object.seek, and then let's try running read lines again. Seek expected at least one argument got 0. Okay, so maybe we will have to look at the documentation. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll look up Python file, and we'll do seek. Looks like here's some documentation. So the seek sets the file's current position at the offset. Defaults to 0. There's an offset. Seek. So let's just try 0. Maybe that will be the beginning of the file. So let's try that. We'll save that. Run it again, and it looks like it works. So we print it out once. We've now reached the end of our file. We run the seek method, which kind of is going to reset this cursor, if you will, to the beginning of the file. So we'll see something similar when we get to SQL. We have cursors, and then we can go ahead and read the contents of the file again. Okay. Okay, so now our file is open. We've read the contents. We've gone back to the beginning of the file, read the contents again. Now we need to close the file. Otherwise, we have basically an open file handler or process just hanging around. So we need to make sure that we close the file. So we'll do my file object.close. Okay, so that might not look like it did much, but it's important. And if you were to run a program that was constantly opening files over and over and over again and never closing them, then eventually you would run out of memory, or you'd have so many processes going that you'd start having a problem. So it's important to close files. So the process for files is you open the file. That will give you a file object. You can do whatever you want to do in it, and then you close the file when you're done. But it can be, maybe a little inconvenient. What if you open the file and you do some operations, but there's an error, so you can't close the file then? So there's some circumstances where this might be a problem. Fortunately, Python has a built-in context manager, which uses with as a keyword, and it will basically, it's an API that lots of different things in Python use, and you can write your own objects using Thunder methods that will use the same API. But what it does is it kind of simplifies this process of open the file, do some stuff, and close the file. And while I'm doing stuff, put this in a try catch block, and then put this in a finally block, so that the file always closes even if there's an error. So this pattern gets simplified in Python. So we'll talk about the with statement. So with, and we'll still do open and file slash sample.txt, and we can give this an alias. So this is going to be essentially what this is. So we'll rename this. So we'll as my file object. I'll comment that out. Okay, so now we're running a context manager, and we have access to this file object that we've created. So we've used open, and then we've kind of named it. You can choose whatever name you'd like here. Now I can run the same operations that I ran here. So we ran read lines, so we can do that here. So my file object dot read lines. We can go ahead and we'll just print that. So now you can run this, and it does the same thing, except that I can be sure that this file object is going to close every time, even if there's an error while I'm doing stuff with the file. So it's just a nicer way of working with files. So basically, you should always do this when you're using those files. Always use a with statement to create a context manager, and then open the file, give it a name, the file object as a name, and then do whatever you're going to do inside of that context. Okay, so that's the basics of manipulating files. Now that we have a basic idea, so we know what the with statement is and everything, we can open files. We can start talking again about CSVs. So we care about CSVs in particular here. We have this spreadsheet, and we can go ahead and download this as a CSV file. And then let's try putting it up here. We can rename this something easier. Sample.csv. Okay, so now we have a CSV file. This started as a spreadsheet. You could have entered this by hand, or this could have been generated programmatically, however it works. And now we have this CSV file. So we have our column names up top here: order date, region, rep, item, units, unit cost, etc. And then we have rows, or instantiations of all of these. So we have rows with all of these different particular instances or pieces of data that we have. Okay, so just like we have a text file, we can open the file, we can do stuff with it. We can also do the same thing with a CSV file, because a CSV file is, at the end of the day, it's just a text file. So we can go ahead and do that. So let's take a look at the we'll stick with the with operator because that's best practice, but we could just do open and close manually and do whatever error handling we want to do. So with open, this time we'll open files /sample.csv as CSV file object. And then we can just print out the contents of the file like we did before. So print CSV file object dot read lines. And that works. So just like the other regular text file we have, this CSV file is just a text file. And we can do the same thing, right? So we can open this file, and we can print out everything in it. If we wanted to access this, so let's say we wanted to access in a way that's more like the spreadsheet, we could write our own kind of, we could write our own methods here. So instead of reading lines, let's save the contents of the file to a variable. So, and then CSV file object dot read. So this is going to read the contents of the file, and we'll save that to contents. And then what we can do is, let's say for every line here, we'll basically loop over this blob of text, and we'll separate it by new line. So lines is split, and we'll split it at the new line, just like read lines was doing. and then we can loop over it and print it. So for line in lines, something like that. And if we run this, we can see that now we're just printing out everything in there. And then we can also split this line by comma, for example. So comma separated value, CSV, we can do that. So for item in line dot split again, and we'll split it on the comma, and we do print item. Okay, so now every single value in here is going to get printed. So we could do this, right? We could just use the normal generic Python file stuff to access what we need from a CSV file, but as is often the case, this is a common problem, a common situation, and people have come up with a solution, and that solution has been incorporated into Python's standard library. So instead of trying to do everything ourselves, we're going to go ahead and use what's been built into Python already. We'll do pass here, and we're going to import, there's a CSV module. So this is in Python's standard library, CSV. There's in the README for the class, there's a link, there's a couple links. You can look at the Python docs, which might be a little challenging. But there's also a link to another tutorial that's easier to read. All right, so we've got this. It's the same basic thing. So we're going to open the file. We're going to give it an alias. We're going to save it to a variable. And then instead of just reading it like we did before, we're going to save this as reader, and we're going to use CSV's reader. So CSV reader. So CSV has a reader. We're going to pass it in the file object. So what is this called? CSV file object. Okay, so this is saved now. And then we can go ahead and loop over this. So for line in reader, print line. Okay, so we get something similar. It's a little bit nicer. It's just because CSV file is a standard format, it's fairly easy to use this built-in behavior from CSV instead of implementing our own, splitting and regular expression searching and all that stuff. Okay, so in addition to the regular, let's say the regular reader, the CSV module also has what's called a Dict Reader. So here we're printing out everything, and it's just a bunch of arrays. We can do this as dictionaries as well. So Dict Reader. And we print that out. It's the same basic information, but now notice that it's a bunch of dictionaries, or specifically ordered dictionaries, but it's basically the same thing. But now we get the column name as the key for every value. So instead of just having up here, the first row is the column names, if you look at the CSV file, right? It's basically grabbing all of these for each one here and creating a dictionary. So if you want to do more complex searching and so on, the Dict Reader is a good option. Okay, so now that we have a fair idea of what we can do by having a CSV file or any file, and using Python's file object to manipulate and do stuff, we can also take a file as input and then just write a normal function that goes through that and looks for a pattern or whatever your specific use case is. So let's go ahead and write a function that will grab the information in this CSV file and then calculate the average units sold per order. So here we have this units, right? So here we have 99 units, then 50 units, 36, 99 again, 99, 99. So if we wanted to calculate the average of all those, we could do that fairly easily. So we'll do that here. So let's write a function. So we'll call it def get average units per order. And so what we'll do is we'll loop over every single row in this thing, and we'll grab the value for units, and then we'll add that all up as accumulatively, and then we'll divide it by the total number of orders. So we could set a couple of variables. So we'll do total equals 0. So this is going to get added to for every entry, and then orders equals 0, and that will get incremented by 1 every time we have a new row. So we're going to use this with statement, similar with statement, to start reading from the file. So with open files / sample.csv as CSV file object. And then what we'll do is we'll use the dictionary reader. So we'll create reader equals csv.dict reader, and we'll pass it in that file object, CSV file object. So now that's going to give us what we saw here, just a whole bunch of dictionaries. So what we're going to do now is loop over every single one of those dictionaries and grab units. So the value for the key of units. For line in reader, total. So we're going to add whatever value is there. So line units. But this is a string. Remember, this is a file, so it's all text, so it's all strings. So we're going to have to convert this to an int. Okay, and then we're going to increment orders by 1. And then that should basically be it. So we'll go ahead and print out, we'll just divide the total by the orders. And we can call the function comment this out. Okay, and we get 54.0. So again, we've taken information from a persisted source, a file, and we've just run a normal Python function on it. So there's nothing necessarily special about this data. We can grab it. We could have grabbed it from input on the command line. We could have grabbed it from an API call. We could have grabbed it from somewhere else in our application. So it all ends up being the same, but that's how you do it with that. Okay, so in addition to reading, you can also write. So you can write rows, just like you can read rows, you can write rows, just like there's a dictionary reader, there's a dictionary writer. So what we're going to do now is just see a quick example of a dictionary writer. So we're going to use our same with statement as before. So with, and we'll open files / sample.csv, and there's a slight difference here. So if we look at our helpful signature here, it's telling us that the other parameter is mode. So there's a whole bunch of different modes for file operations. You see it in the README, somewhere in the README. Yeah, so here there's reading. So by default, it will read, and that's all we've been doing so far. So we haven't had to explicitly include that. But there's read, you can read and write, you can just write, you can append. So if you write, it will, if the file already exists, it'll delete the contents and then just write a fresh file. If you append, then it's only going to write to the end of the file. There's also binary mode, which you don't have to worry about right now. So if we want to write a file, then we want to write a file, but we want to just add on to what we already have. So we want to add on another entry to our sample.csv. So we have another order. We want to add on to this CSV file. So we're going to use the append. So that's, you pass it in the string A for append. And everything else is basically the same as CSV file object. And we'll create a writer instead of a reader. So writer equals CSV, and this is going to be a dictionary writer. Dictionary writer. And then here we're going to pass it the file object just like before. So CSV file object. But there's a slight difference here again, right? So we're going to write some stuff to the to our CSV file using the dictionary writer, but Python expects us, at least this particular API expects us to supply it with the column names. And the column names are called field names here. So we need to pass some parameter, and we don't know what that's going to be yet. So we're going to need to, we'll create a new variable called field names. And that's just going to be an array of all of the column names here. So order, date, region, and so on. Order date, region. I'm going to copy this just so I don't have to write this again. But whatever you're using, this will be the column names. And then field names will be field names, this array that we've just created. So now everything's set up. The Python dictionary writer knows where to put things, basically. So I have a writer, and then I want to write just one row. So I want to add one new entry. So writer.write row. So I could write rows, I could write a header, but I'm just going to write a row. You can look at what those other things do if you like. And write row, you can see that it's going to take a dictionary. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this for the sake of time. But we've got all of these keys are the same as the field name. So order date, region, rep, item, and so on. So I've just created some dummy values here. And now if I run this, I should be able to see a change in the sample.csv file. So we're going to go over here, we're going to run, and we can see that we got something new on the end here. But it appended it to the end of the file. So my cursor was right here, and that's how I saved it, so it just appended it right there. If I go down and create a new line on my sample.csv and run this again, it'll put this there. If I save this, and if I keep running it, I can keep adding it. So just, you have to pay attention to where your cursor is when you save the file. That may be an issue that you run into. All right. So now we can read from files, and we can read specifically from CSV files in a convenient manner that Python has built into it, and we can also write. All right, so now we can read and write the files. Let's see if we can apply what we know here and do something a little bit more complicated. So we've been talking about classes, so we're going to write another class. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write a class, and it's going to be called Account Manager. So we have all of this data, sales data, and so on, but we want to write a class that will take in all of that data and then just do different things. So we can write some methods that do, we could find the average of something, we could find the top person for sales, we could find the top products that we sell, basically anything we can think of. So let's go ahead and write a class. It's called Account Manager. So we've got Account Manager, and we'll do class Account Manager. And so there's a question about what should we start with here. So Account Manager is basically, it's going to get its information from a file. So we can't really, we could instantiate it with stuff from a file, but then we're going to have to run a function that reads from the file and then spits it out. So, this is an open question, but what we're going to do is we're still going to have an init method, but our init method, instead of taking in a value when an instance is created, it's going to run a function. So it's going to run a method in the class that will read all the data. Okay, so we'll do def init self, and we'll do we'll call all the information orders. So self.orders equals, and then we're going to call a function that we haven't, or we're going to call a method that we haven't written yet. So self.read data. Okay, so now let's go ahead and stub out the read data method, and that's going to read from our CSV. So def read data self. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read from the CSV file, and then we're going to take every single order, and then we're going to append it to, say, an orders array, and then we're going to store that as self.orders. So there's nothing special here. We're just taking all of the lines, basically, all of the rows here, and we're going to convert them into objects, and then we're going to append them to an array. So we're going to have an array of order objects. So we'll start with our array. And we'll use the with statement to open the file. We'll do file, oops, it's got to be a string, so file /sample.csv, and we're going to read it. So again, before we were just leaving it blank, so by default it'll be read, but we can explicitly say read. It's probably best practice, as CSV file. And what we'll do is reader, so we'll read the object and assign it to a value, csv.dict reader. We use the Dict Reader, pass it the file. We're going to have to import, of course, CSV from the Python standard library. And then we'll go through all of the dictionaries there and we'll append it. So for order in reader, orders.append order. Okay, so now we're going to build up this array, and then we'll return this array. So return orders. All right, so that's going to be our initial, so when we create an instance of the object, this method is going to be run, and we'll dynamically create the content for self.orders. So we won't have to pass anything as long as our data is there. This will be it. So one thing to note here real quick is that you can see that self is grayed out. So my IDE is trying to tell me something. So I have a class method, but I don't refer to an instance of the class in it. So we could leave this like it is, and that's fine. But if we want to be a little bit more precise or careful, we can get rid of the self. But if we get rid of the self and try to run it, Python is still going to try to pass an instance of self in as the first parameter, and it's going to throw an error. So we have to tell Python, hey, this is a method that doesn't use self. And another word for that is a static method. So we can use a decorator. This is basically just a function that takes another function. So the static method function will take a function and it will basically modify the parameters. So that's something that we can do. You don't have to do this, but that's something you can do. Okay, so now that we have all of our data, we can start doing some operations. So what should our account manager do? Well, we could write any number of functions now that might be useful. So we can start by getting a list of all the reps, for example. So def get all of the salespeople, self, and we'll do so we can use set again here if we want to make sure we're not duplicating people. In case there's, you could have the same person making lots of different sales. So for order in self.orders, remember this is an array of dictionaries. We can go ahead and grab reps.add. So we're going to add every single unique rep here. So order rep, and then we'll return reps. All right, so let's go ahead and let's test this out. So we'll do an instance of account manager equals account manager, and just to make sure that this is working at all, we can run this. This is account manager. Okay, so that looks like it's working. What if we do, we'll do am dot get reps. We'll print it out. Oh, yeah, I gotta call the method, of course. And here we get a list of all our reps. So we could use this, we could keep going and keep building this account manager. We could write a method called, we could find out who the top salesperson is. So we have a list of all the reps. We can then go and read through our self.orders again and calculate total sales for the period, and then we could also assign a bonus. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste this in real quick just to show you what that might look like. So this is not so important. This doesn't really matter, but all we're doing here is we're getting the top rep. So we can do print am.get top rep, something like that. If we run this, you can see that it's Smith. Am I printing somewhere? Yeah. So Smith is the top rep with $3,400 some dollars. Okay, so that's good. And then not only can we read, but we can also write. So again, I will copy this for the sake of time, but So we can do something like write monthly bonus. So we have our CSV file, and we read from it. We can also write from it, just like we did here. So we get all our reps, then we find who our top rep is, and then we can give that rep a bonus. So we will open, you can open the file. Actually, we're not going to do it that way. We'll write a new file here, so let me just change this. This doesn't need to be an F string anymore. So we will do files / bonus list.csv. Okay, so we're going to create a new file. So we're going to use W, the W flag, so that means write. So we're going to write a new file. And the field names are going to have the month. Actually, we'll get rid of that. I was going to include that, but that's fine. So we have the month, the rep, and the bonus. So the rep and the bonus. Then we'll write. We'll use the Dict Reader to go ahead and write. And then we'll write the header. So this is another method. This is a particular thing you can look into, but it's just going to write that first line of the CSV file right here with all of the column names. So we'll write the header, and then what we're going to do is we're going to write a row for rep and self.getReps. So every representative is either going to have a true or false if they are the top rep. So there's more efficient way to do this, but that'll be fine for now. So let's go ahead and run that. So we'll run am.write monthly bonus. We ran that, and notice we have a new file generated over here with bonus list, and we have a new CSV file. We have rep and bonus. These are the column names. Then we have all the values. So Smith is true. He gets the bonus. No one else gets the bonus. So again, CSV reading and writing is just a slight modification of the general Python file reading and writing. You can write a class that can initialize its data. Not just, you don't have to explicitly give it stuff. You can also write a function that it will call. There are things called static methods that are available for you that don't. It's kind of like a helper function. Doesn't necessarily need to belong to the instance. And then you can just start thinking about whatever might be useful. So there's a whole bunch of other methods we could write here. We might think about creating another class that does specialized functions, maybe like something that does writing, a small class that handles file writing, another class that handles file reading. You could combine those into another class. So there's all kinds of different ways we can organize these things. But that's the basics of CSV files.